I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Right in the middle of my ranch, yelling at my dogs like a lunatic, stood Susan Matthews, the vice president of the HOA from 3 neighborhoods away. Somehow, she had gotten past my locked gate, marched straight across my pasture in her stiff khakis and pink button-down, and was now brandishing a stick at my 2 Labrador retrievers, Max and Ruby. The dogs were barking defensively but hadn't moved an inch toward her. "You better control your vicious beasts, or I'll make sure they're put down," she screamed, raising the stick as if ready to strike. My heart dropped. I dropped the sack of feed I was carrying and sprinted toward her, shouting for her to stop. Max and Ruby barked louder, but held their position, just like I trained them to, alert but not aggressive. I'd raised them to be gentle with people and protective of our land when strangers came uninvited. When Susan heard me coming, she spun around completely unashamed. If anything, she looked even more confrontational, puffed up like a rooster before a fight. "You're harboring dangerous animals," she snapped, "and you're violating community safety codes. I have every right to be here." "You're on private property," I shouted back, barely keeping my anger in check. "You broke in, and those dogs are trained to protect this land. You're threatening them. You're lucky they're the friendliest dogs on earth," I snapped. Still trying to stay calm, she scoffed and turned the stick on me this time. "I'm vice president of the HOA. I can inspect any property that poses a risk." Before I could respond, my neighbor Joe pulled up in his dusty old pickup, clearly drawn by the commotion. He jumped out, eyes wide, and said the words I'll never forget. "She just committed felony trespassing. Already called the sheriff. They're almost here." At that, Susan's expression changed in an instant. The smugness drained from her face, and she took a step back. But she wasn't done. Without saying another word, she tossed the stick aside, stormed toward my barn, and pulled out her phone like she was about to call backup. I chased after her, Joe right behind me, both of us yelling for her to stop before she made things worse. Max and Ruby stayed on our heels, still barking, clearly confused but loyal to the end. That's when we heard the crunch of tires on gravel. 3 sheriff's deputies rolled up to the gate, lights flashing. Susan froze in place. One of the deputies stepped out, his hand resting calmly on his belt. "Ma'am, you need to stay right where you are," he said. Susan spun around and pointed at me, furious. "He has dangerous dogs. They need to be removed. I'm enforcing community safety codes." The deputy didn't flinch. His face was unreadable as he replied, "Ma'am, you're under arrest for trespassing and animal harassment. Hands where I can see them." Her jaw dropped, completely stunned. And just like that, standing there in the sun, those pearl earrings catching the light, the same woman who once bragged at a town hall that no one could touch her was being cuffed and read her rights right on my property. But just when we thought it was over, things took an even crazier turn. As the deputies were leading Susan to the patrol car, she suddenly twisted, breaking free for a brief second. She let out a shriek so loud it echoed across the fields. "I demand a citizens' committee hearing. I represent the community," she bellowed. The deputies, clearly prepared for anything by now, acted fast. One of them grabbed her with calm precision, securing the second handcuff and double-locking it to prevent any more surprises. Another deputy turned to me and asked, "Sir, do you have security cameras around the property?" "We'll need that footage." I nodded without hesitation. "Yes, sir. There are cameras on the gate, the barn, and the pasture." I pointed toward the big oak tree where I'd installed one last fall after someone tried to steal my tractor. Never in a million years did I think it would capture something like this. The deputy gave a slight nod of approval. "Good. That'll make the charges airtight." As they guided Susan into the back of the patrol car, she kept shouting about safety codes, dangerous dogs, and the HOA charter, her voice growing more desperate and incoherent by the second. It might have been funny if it wasn't so absurd, though, honestly, it just came off as sad. I reached down to scratch behind Max's ears, and Ruby wagged her tail like none of it had happened, completely unfazed. They were good dogs, gentle, loyal and brave when it counted. And in that moment, something deeper hit me. Kindness and respect aren't just for people. They're for everything around you, your animals, your land, even the rules you might not always like. If you stop showing respect, you eventually lose it from everyone else. Joe walked up and clapped a hand on my shoulder, chuckling. "Well, Bud, reckon you got yourself a real show today." I laughed for the first time all morning. And here I was thinking it was going to be a quiet Saturday. Once Susan had been taken away, the deputies remained behind to take my full statement. I walked them through everything, how I'd been carrying feed out to the animals, saw her inside the gate, and watched her threaten Max and Ruby. Officer Carter, who seemed about my age and wore his tan uniform with a Stetson pulled low, jotted down notes with quiet focus. He had the kind of calm that comes from dealing with strange situations too many times to count. "We get these HOA nutcases now and then," Carter said after wrapping up the questions, "but threatening someone's dogs? That's a new one." Joe chimed in, "And trespassing with a stick like she's the sheriff." Carter let out a dry chuckle. "We'll see what the DA wants to pursue. With trespass, animal harassment, and resisting arrest all on the table, it's not looking good for her." After the deputies pulled away, silence settled over the ranch again. I fixed the broken gate latch and made a mental note to replace it with something more secure. Max and Ruby had already found a shady spot near the barn, tongues lolling out, completely relaxed now that peace had returned. Joe stuck around a little longer, helping me stack hay by the barn. We talked about simple things, the county fair coming up, whether the creek needed redigging after the rains. Easy, familiar topics that helped smooth the edges of the morning's madness. Ranch life teaches you not to dwell too long. Nature doesn't slow down for anyone's drama, and that's what hit me most clearly. No matter what kind of chaos people bring, you have a choice. Let it drag you down or deal with it and keep going. I chose the latter. That evening, after Joe headed home, I sat out on the porch with a glass of sweet tea in hand. The sky was lit up in streaks of gold and violet, a reminder that no matter how wild the day, beauty always returns. Max rested, his head on my foot, and Ruby curled up next to the rocking chair like she hadn't nearly been attacked earlier. I was just about to call it a night when my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. "You're going to regret getting me arrested. Watch your back." My chest tightened. My first thought was Susan, but it could have been someone else from that same tangled web of HOA politics. I didn't get long to think about it because right then a pair of headlights turned onto my driveway. They moved, slow, unnaturally slow, like someone trying not to draw attention. Not a neighbor, not anyone familiar. The beams crept closer, cutting through the dark like eyes in the night. I rose from the porch, heart pounding hard in my chest. Max and Ruby lifted their heads too, alert and still. They knew something was wrong. I set down my glass of sweet tea and quietly stepped back into the house to grab the old shotgun my granddad had left me. I didn't load it, at least not yet. I just held it in plain sight, a silent warning that I wasn't in the mood. For games, out in the country, you didn't always get second chances if someone meant trouble. The truck came to a stop about 50 feet from the house, its engine rumbling low and uneven. The cab light flicked on. I narrowed my eyes, trying to make out the figure behind the wheel. He wasn't a neighbor, not anyone I'd ever seen. The man wore a dark hoodie, head down, fists clenching the steering wheel too tightly. His passenger window lowered just a crack, and his voice came through, slick and mean. "You messed with the wrong people, cowboy." My stomach knotted. This wasn't some random threat. Whoever he was, he had ties to Susan. Maybe another HOA, board member who thought rules didn't apply to them. I kept the shotgun pointed down, not aiming, but making it clear I was ready. "You're trespassing," I called out over the engine's growl. "Turn around and leave." He let out a nasty laugh and revved the engine like he wanted to scare me. Max and Ruby were at my side, growling low, ready. Still, I didn't move. "Last warning," I said. For a moment I thought he might actually hit the gas and come at me. His hands twitched on the wheel, but something must have clicked, maybe. He realized I wasn't bluffing, that out here, the sheriff would back me, not him. Finally, he spit onto the gravel, threw the truck into reverse, and tore off, flinging rocks as he disappeared into the dark. I didn't move until the red glow of his taillights vanished down the road. Only then did I exhale, not realizing I'd been holding my breath. Max nudged my leg while Ruby sat and looked up at me, waiting. I knelt and hugged them both tight. "You did good," I whispered. When I finally went back inside and locked the door, the unease lingered. This didn't feel finished. I called the sheriff's office and reported what happened. Deputy Carter said he'd have a patrol swing by a few times that night. Still, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room chair with a shotgun across my lap, watching the moonlit fields through the window, listening for anything that didn't belong. It wasn't just about protecting myself. It was about protecting Max, Ruby, and everything this land meant to me. The freedom, the quiet, the history my family had built here over 3 generations. By the time dawn broke and the sky turned a soft purple, with birds beginning their morning songs, I finally let myself ease up. The night had passed without further incident. I opened the back door and let Max and Ruby out. They tore into the misty morning like nothing had happened, chasing scents, rabbits, and each other with joyful abandon. Watching them reminded me that life doesn't wait. You can let fear hold you in place, or you can move forward like dogs do. I chose to move forward. I brewed a strong pot of coffee, fed the dogs, and headed out to start the day's work. The west fence had been sagging again and needed fixing, and I wanted to check on the garden. The tomatoes were just starting to turn red. As I was hammering in a new fence post, Joe pulled up. He stepped out holding a bakery bag. "Figured you could use a real breakfast after yesterday," he said. I laughed, honestly thankful. "You have no idea." We sat on the porch eating fresh biscuits loaded with sausage and eggs, sipping coffee, while the morning sun rose higher. As I told him about the truck and the threat, Joe's expression darkened. "You think Susan's got some crazy friend still stirring things up?" "Maybe," I said, "but why? She already got herself arrested." Joe shook his head slowly. "Some folks just don't know when to quit, especially the ones who think the rules apply to everyone else but them." He wasn't wrong. I'd seen it before. People who didn't care about decency or fairness, just control. After breakfast, we worked side by side fixing the fence. It felt good to use my hands, to sweat, to laugh a little. It reminded me that no matter what kind of trouble showed up at my door, they couldn't break my spirit unless I let them. By early afternoon, the ranch felt calm again, like the chaos from the night before had finally passed. But that peace didn't last. Joe's phone buzzed, and his expression shifted as he looked at the screen. He turned it toward me. It was a post from a private HOA Facebook group, the same HOA where Susan had been vice president. Someone had posted my address with a message that read, "Dangerous animal owners should not be allowed in the community. Make your voice heard." I stared at it, stunned. This wasn't just anger. They were organizing, and now it was personal. Joe muttered a few choice words under his breath. "We need to get ahead of this," I said. "Fast," he agreed. "I'll call the sheriff. You grab your security footage. Time to show the truth." I didn't waste a second. I grabbed my old laptop and pulled up the footage from the day Susan had trespassed. The video was crystal clear. It showed her climbing the gate, jabbing at Max and Ruby with a stick, screaming threats. It even caught the moment she resisted arrest, shouting about enforcing HOA codes like she was the law herself. It was everything we needed. Joe and I drove into town and handed the footage over to the sheriff's office. Officer Carter was waiting. When we arrived, serious but on our side. After reviewing the video, he nodded. "This will help a lot. The DA's already considering making an example of her." On the way back, Joe and I talked about next steps, reinforcing the gates, adding brighter floodlights, maybe even an automatic alert system for trespassers. "Won't stop crazy," Joe said with a grim smile, "but it'll sure slow it down." When we pulled back into the driveway, the ranch looked like it always did, peaceful. But that feeling didn't last either. Just as I was putting away tools for the evening, a sleek black SUV with tinted windows rolled down the drive. It stopped close to the house, and two men in dark suits stepped out. One of them flashed a badge, but it wasn't from the sheriff's department. It was private security. He spoke in a cold, professional tone that sent a chill straight through me. "We're here to serve you a cease and desist order. The HOA demands you immediately remove all dogs from the property pending a safety review." They weren't officers, they were hired muscle, paid by the same HOA that had just doxed me online. I gripped the screen door handle, not stepping out, my body tense. Max and Ruby stood at my feet, alert and still, reading the tension in the air. The two men didn't flinch. The taller one, wearing sunglasses even as the sun dipped below the horizon, stepped forward and shoved an envelope into my mailbox like he was planting a flag. "You've been served," he said without emotion. "You have 72 hours to comply or face additional legal action." Then they turned, got back in their SUV, and drove off without another word, the crunch of gravel under their tires echoing like a warning. I waited until the SUV was completely gone before opening the door. Max and Ruby stepped out first, alert and cautious, sniffing the air like they were scanning for any lingering threat. I walked over to the mailbox and pulled out the envelope, my hands trembling slightly, not with fear, but with anger. The paper inside was thick and pretentious, stamped with a gold HOA seal at the top. The language was absurd, accusing me of harboring dangerous animals and claiming I posed a significant threat to neighborhood safety. It ordered me to surrender Max and Ruby until a so-called neutral board could conduct a review. I nearly laughed at how outrageous it was. A neutral board? That probably meant Susan's friends sitting in a circle, patting each other on the back and pretending they were important. Joe showed up not 5 minutes later, pulling into the drive like he had a sixth sense for trouble. He must have seen the black SUV leaving. I waved him over and handed him the letter. He read it, his jaw tightening. "This is pure garbage," he said. "They have no authority out here. You're not in their HOA. You don't even fall under their jurisdiction." I nodded, pacing back and forth. "I know, but they're trying to scare me into giving in." Joe looked around, then out toward the horizon, where the sun was sinking, low, casting the land in a deep orange and purple glow. "They want you to react," he said, "but if you react the wrong way, they'll twist it to their advantage." I stopped pacing and stared at him. He was absolutely right. This was bait, and I wasn't going to take it. I went inside and started making calls, first to Deputy Carter, who confirmed again that the HOA had no legal standing on my land. Then I called Laura Bates, an old high school friend who'd become a lawyer. We hadn't spoken in years, but once I explained what was going on, she didn't hesitate. "This is harassment and intimidation," she said firmly over the phone. "If they come onto your land again without a warrant, you can press criminal charges. Civil court, too, if you want." The tightness in my chest eased a little. I wasn't alone in this. The next morning, Laura pulled up in her dusty Jeep Wrangler, wearing jeans, boots, and her trademark no-nonsense expression. She came armed, with a thick binder full of legal documents, case law, and HOA regulations. We sat at the kitchen table going over everything in detail. "You need a restraining order against Susan," she said, "and we're sending them a cease and desist of our own. Show them you're not someone to push around." I smiled, remembering how fierce she'd always been, even back in our high school civics class debates. "I'll do whatever it takes," I told her. "I'm not giving up my dogs. I'm not giving up my home." Laura nodded, satisfied. "Good. Bullies win when decent people stay quiet. You're not staying quiet." We spent the rest of the day drafting legal responses and assembling evidence. Meanwhile, Joe got to work outside, helping me install new motion-activated floodlights around the house and barn. We even hid a few trail cameras along the driveway, just in case anyone tried sneaking back onto the property. By nightfall, the ranch was lit up like a well-guarded outpost, but it still felt like home, my home. And the dogs seemed calmer, too, their tails wagging just a little looser, like they knew we were standing our ground. Ruby darted around the porch in excited circles, barking with joy, while Max lounged in the grass, chewing on a stick without a care. That night, for the first time in days, I slept peacefully, until a loud banging jolted me awake at 2 a.m. My heart pounded as I sat up, and the noise came again. Not a knock, not a plea for help, but the harsh, deliberate sound of something being struck. I grabbed my shotgun and rushed to the front window. Under the glow of the floodlights near the barn, I saw 3 shadowy figures in dark clothing with hoods drawn low over their faces. One of them was smashing my barn door with a crowbar. Another was defacing the feed shed with spray paint. Max and Ruby were already in a frenzy, barking with such force it seemed to shake the walls. My hands trembled as I dialed the sheriff's office. I reported an emergency, trespassers, vandalism, and what looked like arson. The dispatcher was calm and efficient, promising officers were already en route and urging me to stay inside. But I couldn't just wait. I had to act. I slipped quietly out the back with Max and Ruby by my side, moving through the shadows to avoid the floodlights. As I crept closer to the barn, I saw what they had sprayed. Dog killers. My blood boiled. This wasn't a scare tactic anymore. It was personal. One of them pulled out a lighter and a bottle that looked like gasoline. They were preparing to burn down the barn my grandfather had built with his own hands. I stepped into the light and chambered around with a sharp click. The sound stopped them cold. I leveled my shotgun. "You've got 5 seconds to drop." "Hit and lie down," I said, my voice like ice. Max and Ruby flanked me, growling low, unmoving and fierce. The intruders hesitated, but suddenly flashing lights cut through the night. Patrol cars barreled down the driveway, sirens blaring. The men turned to flee, but deputies were already on them, weapons drawn, voices commanding. Within seconds, the would-be arsonists were subdued, cuffed, and pulled to their feet. Deputy Carter approached me quickly. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, adrenaline still coursing through me. "They were about to set the barn on fire," I said. His expression hardened. "Not anymore, they're not. They're facing charges for attempted arson, vandalism, trespassing, and conspiracy." One of the men shouted protests, insisting it was just a prank, but no one was buying it. As the deputies hauled the men away, I noticed something sticking out of one of their pockets, a keychain bearing the gold emblem of the HOA, Susan's HOA. In that instant, everything shifted. This wasn't just her acting out anymore. This was part of something bigger. Deputy Carter stared at the emblem like it confirmed everything he'd feared. He slipped it into an evidence bag with deliberate care, then turned to me. "We're going to need a full investigation," he said quietly. "This isn't just trespassing. It's organized harassment." I nodded, my throat tight but steady. "Whatever you need. I'm not backing down." Carter gave me a rare, approving half-smile. "Good. That's the attitude you need." As the patrol cars disappeared down the road with the suspects in custody, I stood in the yard with Joe and Laura, who'd shown up the moment I called. Joe looked grim, arms folded, feet planted like he was bracing for a fight. Laura was already on the phone, issuing rapid-fire instructions about preserving evidence and collecting witness statements. Max and Ruby paced around us, still alert but calming now that the danger had passed. I turned to the barn, bathed in harsh white light from the flood lamps. The spray-painted words, "Dog killers," would need scrubbing and a fresh coat of paint, but the barn itself was intact. My grandfather's barn had survived the night, for now, but it was obvious now that Susan and her group weren't finished, not by a long shot. They weren't just trying to intimidate me. They wanted to erase everything I stood for. And I wasn't going to let that happen. By sunrise, the ranch looked calm again, but inside, I felt the tension tightening. Laura stayed for breakfast, sitting at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a sharp focus, hammering out a strategy while we ate leftover biscuits and lukewarm coffee. She laid out our next steps in clear terms. File a restraining order against Susan Matthews. File criminal charges, harassment, trespassing, conspiracy, attempted arson. Send a cease and desist letter directly to the HOA board, warning of impending legal action. Prepare a civil suit for damages, targeting both the HOA and, if needed, individual board members. She even suggested going to the media. HOA abuse was a lightning rod, and people loved stories where someone stood up to corruption. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want the attention. I wasn't the kind of person who chased headlines or liked my name in the spotlight. But Joe made a point that stayed with me. If you don't tell your side, he said, they'll tell it for you, and they'll lie. He was right. I had to be smart about this, not just stubborn. After breakfast, Laura left to file the paperwork, and Joe and I got to work on the barn. We scrubbed the spray paint as best we could, though some of it had sunk into the old boards. We'd need to repaint soon. Still, the work gave me something to hold on to, something solid and steady in the middle of everything else. Even small steps forward felt like a win. It all snapped into perspective. The land, the animals, the legacy, and the life I had poured everything into. The threats, the vandalism, the intimidation, just background noise trying to shake the foundation they couldn't touch. That afternoon, I headed into town to give my full statement to the sheriff. Deputy Carter assured me the charges were already in motion, and the district attorney was considering enhanced penalties due to the clear coordination behind the attacks. But as I stepped out of the sheriff's office, something stopped me cold. Across the street, half shielded by a car door, sat Susan in the back of a black sedan. She wore sunglasses and kept her face partially hidden. Our eyes met for only a second, and I braced myself for a flash of anger or panic. Instead, she smiled. Not a nervous or defeated smile, one of quiet, deliberate malice. My stomach dropped. She wasn't rattled. She was plotting. I jumped into my truck and rushed back to the ranch, every nerve twitching. Joe was already there, unloading hardware supplies. The moment he saw me, he knew something was off. "What happened?" he asked. "Susan," I said. "She's not scared. She's planning her next move." Joe spat in the dirt. "Let her. She's already losing." But I wasn't convinced. Something deeper was turning. That night, I secured every door and window, double-checked the alarms, and kept the shotgun close. Max and Ruby rested at my feet on the porch, their ears twitching at every sound. I couldn't shake the image of that cold grin. And just after midnight, the stillness shattered. The roar of engines broke the night, and 4 black SUVs tore through the broken gate like wolves in the dark. Headlights off, they sped up the driveway and skidded to a stop in a tight arc around the house. Max and Ruby shot up, barking with fury. I grabbed the shotgun and ran into the yard as doors flew open and armed men in tactical gear spilled out. Not law enforcement, not deputies. Private security, guns, zip ties, and arrogance. One of them held a clipboard, another wore a headset. They moved, like they owned the place. Joe came running from his trailer near the barn, hunting rifle in hand, his face set in stone. I raised my shotgun. "This is private property. You have no authority here." One of the men stepped forward, buzzcut in bulk, holding a document that looked freshly printed and entirely bogus. Under emergency HOA safety protocol, we are authorized to remove dangerous animals and secure the property for inspection. Joe let out a bitter laugh. "Big mistake, son." But they didn't stop. Joe and I chambered rounds simultaneously. Max and Ruby's barking hit a fever pitch. Then salvation came screaming up the road. Sirens! Deputy Carter's voice thundered through a bullhorn. "This is law enforcement. Drop your weapons. Hands in the air." The intruders froze. Joe and I didn't lower our weapons, but we didn't have to use them. Patrol cars roared in, pinning the SUVs in place. Deputies jumped out, weapons ready, badges flashing. Within moments, the so-called security team was disarmed, cuffed, and lined up against their own vehicles. They never stood a chance, and this time, they knew it. Deputy Carter strode up, his face tight with anger. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, still catching my breath. "They said they were authorized by the HOA, I told him. His jaw clenched hard. "Not anymore, they're not." He turned to his deputies. "Book them for criminal trespass, unlawful detainment, impersonating law enforcement, and conspiracy to commit home invasion." I stood there, stunned, as the intruders were cuffed and dragged away without a word. Then Carter looked back at me, his expression shifting. "You're going to want to come into town tomorrow," he said. "We've got warrants going out." "For what?" I asked. His answer was a grim smile. "Susan Matthews, and the HOA president, too." The next morning I was awake long before dawn, nerves buzzing with equal parts anxiety and anticipation. This was it, the day things might finally break wide open. Max and Ruby stayed close as I moved around the house. Pouring coffee I barely touched, checking the locks again even though the night had passed quietly. I didn't need caffeine. Adrenaline had already taken over. Joe met me at the front gate, his jeans dusty and his ball cap low. He didn't say a word, just gave me a solid clap on the back. It was enough. We drove into town in silence, the truck humming down the old road as the morning light crept up over the horizon. The world outside was still and calm, but my mind wasn't. I kept replaying the week, Susan trespassing, the threats, the attack in the dead of night, and wondering what was really behind it all. Was it just power, control, or something deeper, more calculated? When we reached the sheriff's office, Carter was waiting, all business. His uniform was crisp, eyes alert. "We've issued arrest warrants," he said without preamble. "Susan Matthews and Mark Phillips, HOA president." Joe let out a low whistle. "Didn't see that one coming," Carter nodded. "Turns out Phillips has been running a long con. Extortion, fake inspections, illegal private security. Susan's been helping him cover it up." He handed me a stack of papers, copies of the warrants, civil charges, and new protection orders. "Barring Susan and the HOA board from coming anywhere near my property. This doesn't just protect you," he said. "It blows their whole scheme wide open." I flipped through the pages slowly, the weight of it hitting me all at once. Relief, maybe, or justice finally catching up. But Carter wasn't done. He slid a sealed manila folder across the desk. "You're going to want to see this." Inside were pages and pages of printed emails, Susan, Mark, other board members, discussing how to drive out homeowners they didn't like. They joked about fabricating reports, using fines and threats to force people off their land. Then I saw it. My name. Target, my name. Status, rural holdout note. Ideal for future subdivision development, subdivision. That word hit like a sucker punch. It was never just about dogs or noise complaints. They wanted my land, my 60 acres, right on the edge of town. Prime real estate for developers eager to build soulless rows of homes and strip malls. They didn't want to scare me. They wanted to erase me. And now I finally understood. I wasn't just a nuisance to them. I was standing between them and millions of dollars. Joe leaned over my shoulder, reading the documents with a deepening scowl. "Those dirty rats," he muttered. Carter crossed his arms, his voice grim. "They saw you as an obstacle, someone to bully off the land. That's why they came down. So hard when you didn't give in." I stared at the paperwork, fists tightening. This wasn't personal. It was greed, cold, ruthless greed, and they'd nearly gotten away with it. Nearly. Laura strode into the sheriff's office minutes later, her heels striking the tile like gunshots. One look at the folder and her expression turned to fury. "They're finished," she snapped. "We're filing for damages so steep they'll be lucky to afford a garden shed when this is over." For the rest of the morning, we worked with the deputies, signing affidavits, submitting evidence, building a legal fortress around the ranch that no HOA bully could breach. It was draining, but it felt powerful. For once, the good guys weren't just holding on, we were winning. By noon, we left the sheriff's office, and for the first time in days, I felt a little lighter. Joe and I grabbed lunch at the diner. Greasy. Burgers and sweet tea that somehow tasted like the best meal of my life. Laura joined us, laughing, as she talked about how much she wanted to see Susan's face when the handcuffs snapped shut. "I might just come along for the show," she said with a grin. For a moment, it almost felt like things were back to normal, but I knew better. People like Susan didn't go down without a fight. Just as I was paying the bill, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. This isn't over. You'll wish you left on your own terms." I stared at the screen, my appetite gone. Joe leaned in, his jaw clenched. Laura took the phone from me, quickly typing. "Send it to Carter. He'll trace it. Might be Susan. Might be one of her thugs." She stayed composed, but I wasn't. This one felt different. Less like a threat, more like a warning. Back at the ranch, everything looked too normal. The broken gate had been patched. The fields shimmered under the afternoon sun. The barn stood tall. Max and Ruby bounded up to greet us, tails wagging. But something felt wrong. My skin prickled. Joe felt it too, his eyes scanned. Constantly, his hand never straying from the revolver on his hip, I checked the cameras, nothing. Motion sensors, clear, security lights, all working. Still, that unease lingered. At sunset, Joe and Laura said their goodbyes, promising to return first thing in the morning for court. I stood on the porch with the dogs, watching their trucks vanish down the drive. The ranch was quiet, too quiet. Then came the first shot, a crack like lightning. The mailbox exploded. Max and Ruby bolted. Another shot hit the barn. I dropped to the porch, heart pounding. From the tree line I saw them. 2 figures crouched behind the fence, rifles aimed. Snipers on my land, firing at my home. Crack, crack, crack. I crawled low, my heart racing like a war drum. Splinters exploded around me as another bullet slammed into the porch railing, missing my head by inches. Max and Ruby were huddled just inside the open doorway, whining, but staying low, just like they'd been trained. I needed cover. Fast. I rolled onto my stomach and crawled across the porch, dragging myself to the front door. I ducked inside and slammed it shut behind me, dropping to my knees as I reached for my phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. "Shots fired," I managed to say. "At my ranch. 2 shooters, rifles firing at the house. I need deputies." "Now," the dispatcher's voice was calm, steady. "Stay low, sir. Units are on the way. Stay on the line." I kept the phone pressed to my ear as I crawled toward the hallway, keeping close to the floor and moving to the back of the house, where there were fewer windows. Another shot shattered the front window, sending a shower of glass across the livings room like sharp, glittering hail. I swallowed my panic and forced myself to focus. Max and Ruby stayed close, their bodies pressed against mine, tails tucked in fear but trusting me to keep them safe. In the mudroom, I grabbed my old hunting rifle from its cabinet and checked the magazine. Fully loaded. I wasn't looking to start a firefight, but I wasn't going to sit there helpless either. Every second stretched out like an eternity. I could hear the shooters yelling, angry, low voices I couldn't quite make out. Then, a sound I'll never forget. Sirens. A whole convoy of them screaming closer by the second. I peeked through a side window, just in time to see sheriff's cruisers racing down the drive, lights blazing, dust flying. Deputy Carter's SUV was in front. The gunfire stopped abruptly. The shooters must have heard the sirens, too. I heard them scrambling, running. Then came the shouts of the deputies. "Drop your weapons, hands in the air!" I saw the 2 figures take off across the pasture toward the woods. Deputies gave chase. Max barked once, sharp and loud, like he understood things had changed. I stayed low, heart pounding, listening as more yelling echoed through the trees. Then silence. Then the crackle of radios. 2 suspects in custody. Carter appeared at my door, motioning for me to stay put, while his team swept the house and property for more threats. When he gave the all-clear, I finally stepped outside, still shaking, adrenaline burning through my veins. "Are you all right?" he asked, eyes scanning me from head to toe. I nodded. "I'm fine. Max and Ruby, too." He gave my shoulder a firm clap. "You're lucky. Those men were hired guns." "Hired?" I echoed, stunned. "Private security contractors? Former military?" "Someone paid them to intimidate you, or worse." I didn't need to ask who. Susan Matthews. Probably Mark Phillips, too. Carter gave a tight nod. We found evidence linking. Susan to the payment. Texts, cash transfers. She's going down. Conspiracy to commit assault with a deadly weapon, among other charges. Relief hit me so hard I almost collapsed. It was over, finally, truly over. The ranch bore the marks of battle. Bullet holes scarred the porch, the mailbox lay in pieces, and the barn carried the fresh wounds of gunfire. But we had made it through. I had made it through. And Susan. She was about to face a kind of justice no amount of manipulation or intimidation could escape. The next few days passed in a haze. The sheriff's office filed charges against Susan Matthews, Mark Phillips, and every HOA board member connected to the attacks. Word spread quickly. Headlines blared across town. HOA leaders arrested in ranch assault. Suddenly, the truth was out. Neighbors who once turned up their noses at my ranch came by with apologies, casseroles, and offers to help rebuild. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't carrying the weight alone. Laura wasted no time filing the civil suits. We went after the HOA, after Susan personally, after Mark. And with the mountain of evidence, vandalism, trespassing, threats, arson attempts, and outright attempted murder, the courts moved fast. The verdict was clear. We won. Susan and the HOA were ordered to pay for the damage, and then some. They lost their positions, their reputations, their bank accounts. The HOA itself was dismantled, officially disbanded by the court, and labeled a criminal organization. When the dust finally settled, I hadn't just saved my ranch, I'd grown it. Some of the properties owned by Susan's crooked allies went up for auction to cover their debts. I bought 2 more acres bordering my pasture. Max and Ruby ran wild across the expanded land, tails high, tongues lolling, free in every sense of the word. A few weeks later, Joe and I stood at the edge of the new property, watching the sunset spill color across the sky. "You did good," he said simply. I smiled, the truth of it sinking in deep. "I didn't do it alone," he laughed. "Maybe not. But you had the guts to stand when most folks would have turned tail." I knelt beside Max and Ruby, scratching. Behind their ears, they looked at me with nothing but love, no trace of fear or anger, no shadow of the violence they'd witnessed. Dogs live in the present. They forgive. They move on. Maybe it was time I learned to do the same. Life on a ranch is never easy. It brings storms, real ones, and the kind that tear through lives. But if you stay rooted in what matters, protect it with everything you've got, and refuse to let fear dictate your path, you can weather any storm, even the ones you never saw coming. As the sun dipped below the trees and shadows stretched long across the fields, I stood tall and let the breeze roll over the land I had fought so hard to keep. This was my home, still mine, always mine, and no HOA, no thug, no greedy developer would ever take it from me again.